Good evening, good afternoon, and good morning, depending on where you are watching us from today. My name is Amy Augustine, and I'm the current chair of the Research, Innovation, and Strategy Committee for ASCM. I am joined today by Morgan Swink, PhD, West Chair and Professor of Supply Chain Management at TCU, and Nada Sanders, PhD, Distinguished Professor of Supply Chain Management, Demorge McCabe School of Business, Northeastern University. Both of them will be discussing their research, how to build a digital supply chain, focus on capabilities today. So welcome, Nada and Morgan.
Thank
So
you
I know,
for having us.
Great to be here.
all right, so let's get into it. And folks, if you have any questions for Nada and Morgan, please type them in the chat box. So let's start. Morgan, why study the digital supply chain transformation?
Well, so Nada and I have both been really interested in technology and innovation for many years. And of course, there's so much hype, so much in the popular press around digital transformation, so many great stories out there of companies who are radically changing their supply chain. So we just wanted to see, does the reality match the hype, first of all, and what is it that is actually happening in some of the leading companies in different industries? How do they view digital transformation? Do they even think of it in those terms? And what are some of the best kind of practices in terms of making those changes? So it was really a labor of love for us, and ASCM was a great partner with us in terms of helping us make connections and funding the research. So it's a great project.
Nada, is there anything you'd like to add to that?
Yes. So, if you Google the term digital transformation over the last few years, the interest has exploded. And if you really look at the popular press, it's incredible how much interest there is. And even now with COVID, as companies really grapple with terms of, building resilience, as the popular term is, right? We're constantly hearing digital. So we approach this with the idea, the excitement to be able to see, what is really happening in industry. What are companies doing? What are the key lessons and the key takeaways? And as we're going to share with you, I think we went in with one idea, and we're a little surprised in terms of the findings that we had, but I think we have some really important insights that were important pre-COVID. I think they're even more important now during the COVID era as companies try to figure out how do they build new systems in order to be resilient, make it through COVID, and then thrive in the post-COVID era.
Thank you. So Nada, do you want to continue with what are some of the biggest learnings that you had from your research?
Well, let me just kind of backtrack and say that we approach this with the idea to actually identify what are the key factors that contribute to digital supply chain transformation. What are the obstacles? What are the best practices? We interviewed. I spent a lot of time. It was a 3-year project with all leading companies, all leaders in their respective industry sectors, and companies across a wide range of industries. Everyone listening would have heard of all these companies. So Morgan and I approached this, as Morgan had said, it was a labor of love, and we really wanted to find out these amazing best practices. One of the things that was very interesting is that every company, without exception, said, well, we're below average, we're behind the curve. So obviously, if you know averages, you know that, that's not possible. And as Morgan had already said, there's so much hype. So what we realized is that there is all this hype in the popular press in terms of what automation technology can do for companies and supply chains. But the reality really didn't meet that. It didn't measure up. So then we took a deep dive to really begin to look at, okay, what are the key differentiators of companies that were ahead and those that were lagging, and can we pull out, can we identify some of the key elements? And as we're going to discuss with you here, I think we were able to do that. But the key lesson is that for us, there is too much hype. Most companies don't know what to do. They don't have a guiding roadmap in terms of how to proceed. And we think that we're able to at least come up with something that companies can use thanks to ASCM and this research.
Great, thank you. Morgan, is there anything you'd like to add to that question?
Sure. So in terms of some findings or best practices, I mean, the first at the top level, the first thing is there's a lot of variance across leaders and across companies in terms of how they view the opportunity, I guess you might say it. We found a few, although everyone said, yeah, we're behind, which couldn't possibly be true, but I think they feel that way because of all the stories you hear in the popular press, about a very, very select few companies who are making big progress. But in any case, there are some of the leaders had a much more holistic, bigger picture view, more strategic view, if you will, of truly an idea around digital transformation. But the vast majority of the folks that we spoke to were really more in the frame of how do we find solutions to certain problems. So they're very problem driven in their thinking about the opportunity. And so a couple of the things that we did to try to help that situation were to develop some frameworks. The first one is just to think about different technologies holistically, right? So instead of thinking about specific solution providers or vendors or technologies, to first get a big picture of what is the landscape of technological opportunity out there. And you can think about these digital technologies in the supply chain space in basically four arenas. There are decision support types of technologies, and that's where you hear about AI and other ways to make more intelligent decisions. There are processing technologies, so this is where automation comes in, but not just robotics, but automation of transactions, automation of all kinds of processes, both kind of soft processes and more transformational, tangible types of processes. There are communications technologies, all those IoT and sensors and all the types of tools and technologies that help us capture data, codify that data, make sense of that data in a more reliable, real-time way. And then there are what we call platform or integrative types of technologies. So part of the first step, I think, for many companies is just to get an education and to get a common understanding of what the opportunity space is and how these different technology types and solutions within the different categories of technology can actually enhance or improve the overall supply performance. Thinking about it in an integrative system way, as opposed to, well, here's a pain point that we can try to address with this solution. So that would be step one. I'll stop there and see if Nada wants to add to it.
I'd like to add that I think it's very important to underscore that what we saw most companies is looking at technology as a solution to solve a problem. They might have a particular issue, so technology is something that you add to address and solve a problem. The more advanced companies really had a bigger vision, a unifying vision, or the organization as a whole really understood what digital supply chain actually meant. And they were actually working towards a maturity model and a strategic vision. So there was this sort of unifying collective vision and approach, as opposed to this sort of, get a technology to solve a problem. And that was actually one of the really interesting differentiators, whereas, certain leading companies might, again, look at that technology as a strategic weapon, we saw other companies that would argue in terms of, what was the payback period? Who was going to pay for it? What was the immediate ROI? And a much more short-term view. But what we were able to do was develop a maturity model in terms of stages that companies need to go through in order to really move along this curve. And the first one has to do with data. So, a few years back, we all talked about, we need more data. Most companies today are simply inundated with data. But we did not find a single company that actually had access to clean, scrub data in real time. The amount of time that it took to access that data had a tremendous amount of variation. So to actually digitize, to digitize information, or to have the data accessible in digital form, was the first step. And then the second step would be to be able to communicate that data to all the parties involved. And then what we need is to have a system to make sure that we have intelligence from the data, that the people that need information to make decisions actually can use it, have it in usable form. And lastly, part of this maturity curve is to have a system, have a supply chain that can then respond to it. And without the ability to respond, you don't have a digital responsive supply chain. You just have data, and then you don't have communication, and then you don't have intelligence, which is what you need. And then you need to have had established a system that can then respond to this in a very iterative kind of a way. Most companies weren't even fully at that first stage where they had access to digital data, if you will, and then communicated it and used or had intelligence coming off of this. And this is, I think, one of the really important steps as companies move through this, through these stages of maturity, because you cannot have intelligence, for example, unless you first start with being digital and having data in digital form.
I loved how you guys both described moving from kind of those opportunistic adoptions to like this integrated strategic roadmap to get there and get your supply chain into this digital world. So let me ask you both, why are identifying capabilities so important for a company's supply chain digital transformation strategy?
Well, the capability, focusing again on capabilities, that is, what is the resource or the differentiating ability or skill that an investment in technology provides, as opposed to thinking about it in terms of solving a problem. That's what makes it strategic, right? So capabilities are competitive priorities, or ways to compete, to differentiate your supply chain's performance from the performance of your competitors' supply chains. And so part of the other contribution that we were able to make with this study was to develop a capabilities map. And I don't know if some of this is going to be available in an article, I think, Amy, that you could post for everybody. But that's just another way of, along with the maturity model that Nada described, it's another way to think about what are the end goals that we're trying to achieve from a strategic perspective that differentiate us, to help us to actually create value that's consistent with our company's overall strategy. Just a bigger picture way to think about things. So that's probably the third big takeaway, is to try to focus on capabilities instead of these solutions. And we don't have time here, but we have this framework and map to help folks think about capability options and which ones might be most important for them given their competitive situation.
Yeah, if I can add to that too, I think when we look at digital, there are two fundamental functionalities that digital gives us that are are really the foundation of the capabilities framework. And one is automation and one is insight. So we look at so many devices that we have, robots, computers, and so forth, that really automate all kinds of processes that are traditionally performed by humans. So digital gives us automation, but also digital accelerates and enriches our insights. So these are really the two key dimensions, or the foundational dimensions of this. And I think most companies don't really think about their uh, these two capabilities complementing each other to give a full suite of what Morgan had talked about. Most of them will go try to find a solution to a problem, but I think when we combine the automation capability with the insight that digital can give us, um, and really increase those two dimensions, we can really get a very rich set of capabilities that is important for companies to strategically identify and pursue. Because what I covered is that oftentimes in companies, there were parallel efforts that different parts of the organization were not aware of, um, that were being pursued, dashboards and things like that, without this sort of unifying vision in what the capability that they were pursuing strategically is what they wanted. And I think the companies that we had the opportunity to work with, um, really was an aha moment for them. It was very much an aha moment to actually, you know, for us to show them, this is what you're doing and what is it that you're trying to do. Let's articulate it. And when they were able to articulate it, to realize that what they had were these solutions that might be along the dimensions that I had mentioned, without really complementing each other to give them the capability that they ultimately strategically wanted.
Great. So I'm going to end with one last question, and then we'll see if any of our viewers have any questions for both of you. But, Nada, what are some of the best practices that successful companies had for their supply chain digital transformation strategy?
Well, and I don't like, I'm not going to single out a company, but I think that first of all, starting with this sort of shared vision and an understanding of what digital looks like. So I think that everybody needs to be on board with that. We also really need a leadership team that is going to develop this maturity model that I had shared with you, and to really identify the critical stages where the company is at and help the company move forward. You really can't skip the stages. And so really understanding where the challenges are, where the obstacles, and how they're going to move forward. The understanding of the capabilities that they're looking for is another factor. Being able to articulate that and understand that they really can't be pursuing solutions to individual, isolated, siloed problems, but an overall vision. And understand that these technologies complement one another to give the firm this support, this capability that they're trying to pursue. And then on a more tactical level, to really put together a coalition with someone in charge, a board that really guides the overall process, and the leadership to do that is absolutely critical.
So Morgan, what are your thoughts on best practices?
Yeah, so I would just add that a lot of the kind of classic change management competencies apply here. One of the things that we heard again and again when we asked folks, what were the biggest obstacles to success in these transformation efforts, and it rarely was the technology itself. It was almost always organizational issues or talent issues. So it's really important to keep in mind how the organizational structure needs to change in order to capitalize on the capabilities that some new technology investments might yield. And then also, talent can be a limiting factor, especially if you're doing something really new. Um, if you're trying to leverage intelligence or AI or different uh, data science analytics types of capabilities, that's a scarce commodity these days. That's just one example, but it's a way of thinking too, just having people who are in place who can be a part of this bigger and buy into this bigger vision that sometimes requires give and take across functions, as Nada mentioned a minute ago. So don't forget about the organizational change and the talent piece. Don't get lost or myopically focused on just the technology.
Great, thank you. And I think I saw one question from a viewer, and they wanted to know any ideas on integration of AI with supply chain, if you had any thoughts.
Well, there's dozens and dozens of applications out there. Nada, I shouldn't speak for her. She's actually an expert in forecasting. She's done a lot of research in that area, and that's the first area that jumps to mind when I think about AI. Of course, there's vision systems and automated vehicles and those things that use AI, but a lot of companies have improved their forecasting outcomes pretty dramatically with some AI based tools. Nada, you want to add some more?
Yeah. So I think so. Personally, I think that with my own work, yeah, it's a little bit of a pet peeve. And as Morgan and I had shared with you, there is this really infatuation with kind of what the hype is versus what the reality is, what the obstacles are. As already Morgan had mentioned, a culture was something that we repeatedly, every single time, without exception, heard. So we hear the amazing things that AI can do. I think forecasting is really important. But look at where we're at now. Okay, we're in the middle of this COVID pandemic, and all the AI in the world has not been able to really forecast for us. The onset, the duration, how long this pandemic is going to last, what the impact on global supply chains is going to be. So it goes back to I think 2 points I want to make. Morgan had mentioned the talent piece. What we found in our work, talent being important. And so I think that I'm not trying to diminish the role of AI. I think that AI is really important and it can do things that we simply as humans cannot do. But I think it's really important to have the integration with the culture and the talent, and purely looking at AI alone in isolation, I think is not going to advance supply chains in the long run. Is really what I think. So we have these cases, obviously, with drones and robots, and we're doing some amazing. The operations in the production line, absolutely amazing things, and certainly forecasting on the downstream, but also upstream in terms of being able to predict scarce resources, supplier risk, things like that. Really, really important. All I'm saying is that I think that connectivity along the supply chain is really important. And oftentimes less is more. And I think focusing on the culture and talent is important.
Great. So I think we're just about out of time. So I want to take this opportunity to thank you both, Nada and Morgan, for your time today and sharing your insights on your research. I really enjoyed our discussion, and I hope everyone out there watching did as well. If you're interested in reading more about Nada and Morgan's research, the report can be found using the link that's going to be posted in the chat feature here right now. So once again, thank you all for attending, and we look forward to hearing from everybody in the future. Hope everyone stays safe and healthy.
Thank you for having us.